The lure of regional locations for first home buyers is real. Affordability and tight-knit communities are just two of the key drivers. But beware, just because it may seem cheaper than a capital city, it most definitely is not easier or without risk. Today we shine the spotlight on regional New South Wales, and with the help of local expert Matt Ward, we'll lift the lid on what you need to know and what mistakes you need to avoid.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyers agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Local knowledge is so important when buying property, and today we're talking to a local expert who's going to share his tips on what first home buyers should be looking for and the mistakes that can be avoided in his area. Now, when we say his area, our guest today is buyer's agent Matt Ward, who's the founder of WPG Advisory, and his area is quite huge. So we talk about local specialisation. Today's local area is basically central West New South Wales. Is that the right description, Matt?
Pretty much. We travel from sort of Tamworth, Armidale, Port Macquarie down to Wagga, Albury, those sort of areas. So it's 300 to 400 k's in each direction. You try not to do that trip in a day.
No, and so in Sydney, you know, being a Sydney-based buyer's agent, we stick to a 10k radius of the CBD.
Same with Brisbane.
That's what we call local knowledge, and you call local knowledge probably a 600-kilometre stretch down the in the Central Tablelands and so on. And I probably got the terminology wrong because I'm not a local expert. But anyway,
and that's why we like to talk to people like you, Matt.
Yeah,
exactly. So with this episode and this interview with you, we've had you before. It's springboarding off a chat we had with Damien Hoare, who was a first home buyer and a mortgage analyst who told us his story about buying in Dubbo. And we thought, you know what? Why not get you back to talk to us again about what's happening in regional New South Wales?
Yeah, sure. So look, some good news stories coming out of regional New South Wales. I think it's not the popular topic of the media. It's very Sydney-centric. That's where most of the readers live, all that sort of stuff. So people like to read about their own backyard. So it sort of it goes under the radar a bit. And there are some really interesting stats around what the markets do, how much money you need to be earning to buy in markets, particularly regional markets versus metro markets. And generally, the affordability is certainly there, and some of the market gains. Generally, they yield better, 30 to 50% better than certain parts of metro markets, and the capital gain is on par with or better than large areas of Sydney metro. So it really is a good news story from above looking down. But as you said in the intro, not all country towns are built the same, and not all streets within those towns are built the same. And it's basically all the elements that you have of Sydney Metro, from the eastern suburbs to the inner west to the western area of all those demographics are still in most country towns or regional cities, but instead of being kilometres apart, they're streets apart. And it's really important to know how to recognise that, because even you can be on the same street, but if you're number 2 in the street as opposed to 200, you can be in a completely different demographic neighbourhood. And those things sometimes can be really hard to determine, and not always by driving down the street can you tell. So you've got to look at, other sources of information of what's driving, those certain streets or that particular sector of the market. Why is houses 1 to 50 different to 2 to 250, even in the same street? And ultimately, what's driving the economy? What is making people go to work each day? Where do they go? What do they do? How far are they commuting? What's their salaries like? How is that reflected in the property prices and the potential for capital growth in those cities and towns?
So Matt, we're just basically giving an overview of where the dynamics that you've got to look at in a regional area. Like if you're looking in a city, you might be looking over a larger area, but you've got the same dynamics. You just got them in a smaller, one street might have a good end and a bad end versus one suburb having good end and a bad end.
Yeah.
All right.
So I was just about to launch into the economies.
Yes. Okay. And so this is the thing, when people are actually moving from one place to another, when they're moving from a city to a regional area, or whether they're moving from another regional area to a different regional area, I guess they've got to understand that the drivers are different because the employers are different, because the reasons for people living there are different. There's lots of the agriculture might be different. There's I guess the landscape's different. There's lots of differences that happen from one area to another. I'm quite interested in, that's a big long area that you do cover. You go Tamworth right down to Albury. That's a lot of land, a lot of New South Wales, a lot of very different types of places. So are there
different climates too, Veronica? Yeah. There's massive differences in the climates and the effects of climate on different areas.
Yeah, certainly.
So from a buyer, what are some of the assumptions that you might think that a buyer might use or might apply if they're looking in one area and they think they know one area and then they go to another and they could make really huge mistakes because they're not actually paying attention to what's different?
Yeah, look, I think there is a town, city, which has a suburb of quite good modern housing. Historically had a lot of government employment in there. But either side of that is very heavily populated social housing with it. And if you look at the crime rates, those are pretty hot spots in that town. But in the middle of them is this, more modern housing estate. And driving through there, you wouldn't necessarily pick up that it's a bit of a hot spot because it is a thoroughfare for the neighbours to wander through to each other's houses. And on the way through, they'll steal a car or break in and do a few of those sorts of things. And you don't know that driving through. The values are better, the houses are better, but in comparison to similar style housing estates in other parts of town, the values are certainly down. Type of tenancy, and so the yields are a little bit better. The capital values are lower, and you think, oh, it's great. When I first walked into the town, I was like, oh, what's going on here? This is sort of an untapped secret. But then once you sort of delve into a few of the idiosyncrasies of that town and how the housing estates work, and it all sort of starts to work out. So it's the only shopping centre I'm aware of. The local neighbourhood shopping centre has a security guard permanently on. You drive around other shopping centres, that's not the case. So that's sort of an indication of what's going on at shopping centres. If you've got full-time security, because most of them don't.
Is a clue.
And that's one of our tips, actually, isn't it? To go to an area and to walk around and to go to the shops and go to the cafes and see if they're people like you, please. So it's a really good point that you make there. If you don't have that local knowledge, The risk, Matt, is that you might apply some pricing information to the wrong area and either get your price wrong when you make an offer, or end up with a property that could be substantially below other area capital growth rates, which puts you well behind the 8 ball in terms of growth.
Yes, certainly, and also the attractiveness of the area for tenants and the types of tenants that maybe be willing to go into those areas. Look, it can be very property specific and street or in the wrong cul-de-sac. It's a bit blasé to just label the whole suburb, under the suburb.
Good or bad or indifferent.
Yeah.
Shall we say?
There's always sectors within those things. Another suburb, you go, same name of the suburb, but you go north of the shopping centre and it's perfectly fine. Go south of the shopping centre, and it's glowing red with social housing and crime. So even the same suburb within the town can be different. So it's you've really got to understand what and where you're buying. And yeah, just because someone says, "Oh, Smith Street's a good street," is all of Smith Street a good street, or is there's other that are not so good? So that's the localities within certain cities and regional cities. The other thing is the economy. What's driving the economy, and where do people go every day, and how much are they getting paid? You get towns like or cities like Orange, where the average salary is probably higher than a lot of other cities because of the types of employment that is here. It's educational, it's health, it's professionals, it's government. Where you go to some other towns where they're more manufacturing based, and the average salaries or wages is lower, and that reflects across the demographic of the city. And that's why some towns seem to be growing sooner or better than others, despite having Orange has got lower GDPs than say Dubbo, Wagga and Tamworth, but its property prices are 20% higher. Why is that? And it comes down to the affordability of the residents and their ability to pay.
Who's earning the money? Earning what money, I guess. So, Matt, you're a highly experienced and respected property guy. In fact, you started out as a valuer. So you had, I think, 25 years experience as a valuer. Is that
15 as a valuer and 10 straight buying now.
Right.
Yep.
Got it. So do you want us, obviously this conversation is going a little bit along the sort of investment lines, and yet we're talking about first home buyers buying into regional area. And look, we know that some first home buyers choose to rent vest, and that is where they rent instead of they rent where they live and they buy and invest in property. But a lot are also taking advantage of work from home, and also more relaxed arrangements around employment and where you need to be. But also there are people choosing to relocate to regional towns and picking particular towns because of other employment opportunities. So what do you see first home buyers doing? Has there been any change since the last time we spoke, which was about 3 years ago on this podcast? Has there been any change to the pattern? Generally speaking, what would you say a first home buyer is likely to be buying in a regional area in New South Wales?
Yeah, so I've done a few stats around median house price in certain council areas, both metro and CBD, metro and regional, and how those council areas have performed in the last 10 years of market growth, and then the sort of salary range that you currently need to buy the median house in those areas. I've sort of shortlisted about 18 different council areas. Top of the list for New South Wales is Orange, 77.4% market growth the last 10 years. Median house 690. You need a household income of gross of between $140,000 and $240,000. Compare that with somewhere like Mossman, where the median house price is 5.3. You've got to be earning somewhere between $1 million and 2.2 to buy the house in there. So if you're trying to, if you're not earning 2.2 million, you've got to start looking at other alternatives. And out of
Hang on a minute.
And here we are opening up the opportunities.
We sort of know that, but we also sort of know that most first home buyers are not buying a house in Mossman, for $4 million. Orange, you just said that the median house price there, and I would imagine most first home buyers would have to be buying under the median in Orange if that's what the income you need to buy a median priced house in Orange as a first home buyer. So, and look, the median, if anyone doesn't know what that is, that's the midpoint. That means that half the properties are worth more and half the properties are worth less than that point. So, that would you say 120 to 250,000? That's still a high salary, right? So, can we look? That's the top of the list. What's more around the middle of your 18 council areas?
Yep. So, this is sort of graded on how well the market has performed from a capital growth point of view over 10 years. Wagga and Bathurst, they're sitting around median house prices around 600,000. You need a couple of $100,000 a year to buy the median house in that locality. At the bottom of the list, you've got Ryde and Hawkesbury from a capital growth point of view, but you need sort of somewhere between around the $950 to buy in Ryde and $330,000 or $40,000 to buy in the Hawkesbury area. So, but the capital growth on those, Tamworth is sort of at the bottom of that list with a median house price of $490 and salary of about $150,000, which for a household is starting to become realistic.
A bit more realistic, yeah.
And for $490,000 in Tamworth, you're getting
for a household.
Yeah, for a house. This is a house.
Household.
Yeah, for the household, $150,000 for the household.
So there might be 70, 80,000 each.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Which is roughly $70,000 is roughly the median, the average wage.
Yeah, about 74, I think.
Yeah. So
Tamworth at the bottom of the list in terms of capital growth. What's going on there?
It's a lag. If you look at what's going on in Tamworth, there's low unemployment. The vacancy rate is at 1.6 and it's trending down. It's got a 28% population growth for the 20-year forecast, and it's GDP of $3.7 billion. Main employment's there, healthcare and construction. So it's one of those towns that I was watching during COVID and beforehand, but just to see how they were all reacting when the market started going crazy. There were a couple of towns that didn't do that, and Tamworth is one of them for no good reason.
Very interesting. Do you think it is, I mentioned this before, do you think it is weather or climate related in terms of the livability from that point of view?
No.
Or attractiveness compared to others? Yeah.
Look, I think, during the last drought, they did have a water crisis for that city. And when I've been buying there in the past for clients, that has come up as a concern.
Right.
But I think there's always a cycle. There's a few, I have to go back and check the records, but there was a point in time when Tamworth was more expensive than Orange. The cycles have moved over time. Those larger regional cities all work off similar economics, and their cycles do over time flow together. So I think there's a catch-up. It's a capital growth opportunity is what I see in Tamworth. There's employment, the unemployment rate's going down. It's already quite tight. The GDP is strong. It's diverse. It's got good health. It's got good education. It's got a diverse economy around tourism, agriculture, and manufacturing, and food processing. So there's a lot of positives for that. Good flights in and out. It's got the pilot training centre, affordable housing. So. And the types of property that you're buying for that, I think it was $490,000, is a 20, 30-year-old, 3-4 bedroom home in the middle of the road sort of suburb. Quite, I've done housing because that's sort of more the constant product across each of the council areas. So it's one of those towns which I think has got a lot of potential, and is sort of flying under the radar. When I first started buying in Tamworth probably 7 or 8 years ago, I had to explain to the agents up there what a buyer's agent was and how we worked and how we, Last time I was up there, which was towards the end of last year, the agent said he was dealing with 8 or 9 other buyers agents at that time. A lot of guys out of Melbourne and Sydney who were buying sight unseen through that process. But so it's certainly hitting the radars of people who are looking at that type of product or investment or that entry or that price point, because you can still buy a quality property in reasonable areas for a realistic price for the salary that you can earn in that town. Whereas that in some other parts of town, some other areas, that has sort of skewed a bit.
I've got some theories on this, right? I always love my theories. This is almost like if I had my elephant in the room hat on, I'd be like drilling into a lot of this stuff, but I won't do that. I'll sort of try to keep it relevant to first home buyers. But the thing is that like Orange is the top of your list in terms of capital growth, and Orange is a city that a lot of Sydney-siders talk about as being sort of an ideal tree change location. So I got a theory that potentially some of that growth has been propelled through the COVID tree change, sea change thing. No sea out there, but you know what I mean. That migration from the cities might have actually helped push Orange to do so well in the last 10 years, as distinct from Tamworth, which isn't really on the radar for tree change. So in terms of capital city money going there, and this is something that is relevant to first home buyers, because you don't really want to be going and buying and following the herd into an area that is being pushed up by dollars or by people that have more money than you've got. So that's one thing, and I'll get to you in a minute to tell me whether my theory is right. On the other thing, on Tamworth, and I met a couple of sales agents from Tamworth at a conference late last year, and they were telling me also about all these buyers agents buying up their sight unseen. And I said to them, so what are they buying? And they said, well, to be quite frank, in their office, they don't sell many properties to these these sight unseen buyers agents because they don't have a rent roll full of crap properties. And they basically were saying that their colleagues in other offices that have a lot of this sort of rent roll with a lot of properties in those lower socioeconomic areas that really struggle for a long time to get any growth in prices, and also struggle in terms of some of the tenants that they've had to deal with, that they have been offloading a lot of their landlord stock that the landlords have really not been very happy with owning for some time. And I've heard a similar story from someone in Armidale. So I've heard this theme. So from a first home buyer's perspective, going into a regional area, this is why you need local expertise. If you don't know what you're talking about or don't know that area, these buyer's agents, and this is why we say if you do our course, you will know more than a lot of these buyer's agents, because these buyer's agents don't care. Yeah. And so they're my two theories, that prices and capital growth, and also what can happen is that capital growth can start going off in places where it shouldn't, but for a period of time, because investors are buying in there, they don't know any better. It's going to inflate prices. And as a first home buyer, you've got to be really careful of that. So there you go. Over to you, Matt. In terms of my theories, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, look, I think, on the whole of it, you've hit the nail on the head. There's I remember when Orange first became a hot spot. I live in Orange, so I'll talk to that. But in 2017, it started to get on the radar as being the place to go off next. But it actually started 2 years earlier to that, and it was already ramping up and had gone up. I can't remember what the figures were now, but it got up significantly in value by the time it became a hotspot. And then it had another kick because it got a lot of media attention about being the next place to buy, driven from mostly outside money. And that continued on for a couple of years, and then COVID happened and it's growing again. And certainly during those COVID years, I was busy relocating Sydney-siders out of Redfern and into the farms or wherever they were going. So that was a bit of fun. But yes, I think a lot of markets benefited from the Sydney exodus. What the prediction at the time was, how long will they last? I think, there's certainly been a turnover. People have sort of woken up a couple of years later and gone, oh, actually, I missed the bright lights. But also there's plenty of that estate, and more have continued to come. Orange being 3 to 3.5 hours drive as opposed to Tamworth, which is probably closer to 5 or 6. Yeah, it does help. certainly day trip into Sydney or spend a lot of weekends in Sydney. And it's very doable. It's a lifestyle thing. Here it's a bit more around the vineyards and the restaurants and those types of things, which people seem to enjoy, whereas a lot of country towns don't have those things. I think they really struggle for identity about what do they bring? What is the offering that they bring from a lifestyle point of view? They don't have a beach, and quite frankly, you go to a lot of coastal towns and it rains. They're pretty boring towns.
Yes.
So what can regional cities do to make themselves more attractive Monday to Friday or Friday to Monday?
Are any doing it well? Are any actually being creative in this space? The vineyard towns?
Yeah, look, I think Mudgee's one of those towns
that's a vineyard town.
It's a vineyard town.
Got wine, that's the go, isn't it?
A couple of hours to Sydney, and it's got wine. That all helps, certainly. That's why the Hunter is as successful as it is. Look, I think some of these towns, Byron Bay's got the beach and it has a name and it's got a couple of celebrities, and for some unknown reason, people, it's a nice beach, but is it the only beach on the New South Wales coast? It's nice? No. But, look, I think a lot of the regional cities struggle. They all have something. Tamworth has got the Country Music Festival. Wagga has a number of food and cycle festivals, and Dubbo is trying to change its persona a bit. But all those three towns are a good 5-6 hours from Sydney, and for a weekend it just gets a bit harder unless you're flying in. You've got very good flight links compared to Orange and Bathurst.
Need to.
Even Bathurst, it's a race town. It might like to think of some other things, and it tries to do other things, but ultimately it's got a big racetrack on the mountain and it operates a lot. And I think as a town, they just generally embrace it and say, yeah, well, this is what we've got.
This is who we are. This is our identity.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on Veronica's second theory, which is the idea that perhaps the stock that's been available hasn't necessarily been the kind of quality that would lead to capital growth over a long period of time, and that investors selling stock in places like Tamworth and other locations. It reminds me a lot of sort of that early 2000s, mid-2000s, 2005, 2007, where there was a big rush from southern investors to buy into mining towns in Queensland. And of course, we talk quite a lot about looking at the economic base of these kind of regional areas, and if they're a single economy driven area, then you actually are putting yourself at great risk. But that was very much driven by very, very low quality stock, heavily sought after by investors because the yield was very good when compared to other areas. Is that something that has been driving some of the growth in some of these areas, Matt, compared to when you look at other buyers, not just first home buyers, but other buyers, some investors looking for higher yields than they might get in capital cities?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Tamworth, for instance, you can net over 4% net yields on most places there if you look around enough. Whereas North Shore below 2. So, and the capital is significantly less, obviously, and different economics. But yeah, look, there's certainly that. I mean, the areas that we buy, we're not seeing. We don't buy in markets that are showing 10 to 20% net yields, which there are towns and there are properties out there that are doing that. But that's a massive trade-off for quality of tenant, the lack of capital growth, very weak housing markets. If you buy it, it's almost an intergenerational purchase because you'll be struggle to sell it.
Yes.
So, yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, or a few years ago now, I was talking to a bloke who was going to buy something for it was $80,000 and he was getting a 22% net yield.
Whoa.
And it's just like...
Still not a lot of income though, is it? It sounds good as a statistic, but it's actually a huge amount of income to tie up that money and the opportunity cost of what you could do with that $88,000.
Yeah, that's right. You're exactly right. The net cash amount was quite small, insignificant really. The air conditioning.
Certainly something to boast about at the barbecue.
Yes. I was talking to another bloke. He had 4 or 5 properties, and he was telling me this, and I was like, wow, like, because I knew this guy for 20 odd years, and I thought, your dad's like the kind of guy who could put together a portfolio of 4 or 5 properties, but there you go. And they're all worth about 30 or 40 grand, and in a small country town. And one of the houses had a sheep living in it because that was a family pet. And it's just like, you probably could have done better than that.
And did you have the because we're fascinated, we're at barbecues, right? As buyer's agents, we want to ask, but unfortunately we often get questions like, I bought in, Timbuktu, and I paid 50,000. Do you think it will go up in value? And Joe and I are actually doing a podcast coming up shortly, which is it's too late to ask. Do you find that as a buyer's agent, you get asked questions by first-time buyers or maybe rent investors or people who are bought in areas who had no idea about the regional aspects, the uniqueness of the regional aspects of the area they were buying in, and they're now looking back going, oh, someone give me some reassurance that this is going to go in a positive direction.
Over the years, a number of people have told me they've bought Cairns units or Townsville units. It's just like, well, it hasn't grown in 10 years. Do you think it's going to? It's like, well, I don't know, maybe. Hang in, mate, you'll be right.
What do you...
And I don't know anything about the Cairns or Townsville markets to know what it's going to do. It's too far out of my reach for that sort of stuff. But yeah, look, and I think this leads on to another point. I don't know how much time I got today, is about where people get parked. So they go to their broker, they go to their financial planner or accountant. You need to buy a property. Here's a bloke I know who's got a property investment company. They do the house and lot package, brand new stuff, buy that. Yeah. And, okay, great. Mm-hmm. The broker, the accountant's getting financial kickbacks. They're getting stuffed into house and land packages, which are overpriced. As long as they don't sell for the first 10 years, the sins will be washed away in market growth, not as much as...
We hope so, but they may not.
They might be.
They may not. And
Glenn, I know you're probably going to say this, Matt, but I just want to throw in there, you may have caught up with what you paid for it, but what has the market done in the meantime to get you into something else as a stepping stone? What have you missed out on? Yeah.
Yeah, and I just don't know how that program works. It's a massive conflict of interest for people who are receiving payments for you investing money when they're not directly related to the transaction, but just for the referral. I certainly see that.
Look, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars, because when I've seen the emails come through to me offering me commissions of like $38,000 on a $750,000 purchase. I mean, do the math. That's a ridiculous proportion, and that is in some cases that's a deposit. If you've gone 5%. So you go, oh well, you've just saved up 5%. That's just been paid out in commissions to people to flog you that stuff, and it's like you really think that that's the value of the property built in, and it's just scary that it can happen. And unfortunately, investors and also first home buyers are caught up in this sort of false help and support. So are you seeing this out in your way as well? This happens in regional Australia as well.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah. Yep. There's quite a couple of these property companies have quite good networks and referral basis, and certainly if they're paying tens of thousands of dollars in referral fees,
it's easy to get refer you.
Yeah.
Look, it's not the way the program that we run, but it's certainly, particularly for those first-time buyers who are looking to do the rent vest thing. They go to a seminar, they get shown the shiny lights, and away they go. I think any company that's not willing to buy second-hand property or doesn't have the ability or the offering of a second-hand property, you really want to look at that very, very closely and don't believe what they say is gospel.
Just on that, I guess if you look at a regional area, there appears that there would be more land that could be potentially rezoned and released, creating more supply into the future. And of course, we talk about scarcity being one of the drivers of capital growth over the long term. would it be true, in our capital cities, to get a land release, you need to go further and further and further and further away from the city, because that's just where the land is. Would it be true to say that you can sometimes find these newer releases a bit closer to the town centre because the land is still there and therefore it feels like it might be safer because it's close to town?
Yeah. And look, yes, there is land available. The hold up to developing that land is planning policy, the council's ability to pay for the servicing of that land and get services to the front gate. I think there's plenty of developer appetite. But you also got to remember that everyone has to make money and be sustainable. And there is a very rigorous program from the New South Wales state government about how land is identified, how far into the future is it identified, and what is its release time frame. And just because it's marked on a map, that it may be 20 years away, and they've got a sort of budget for that and plan for that. And some of that land can be quite close, but as these larger cities get bigger, you're talking Tamworth and Wagga are being promoted for 100,000 population centres. The drive into town can become 10 to 15 minutes. You try driving into Dubbo at 8:30, 9 o'clock from the east, where I do. I had to ring a guy the other day, so I was stuck in traffic, mate.
And he laughed at you.
And I was like, I was just like, this bloody town's too busy. So I was 3 minutes late, and I was able to get a park out the front when I got there. But the commute distance that people are probably prepared to do, even in regional areas, is quite significant. So, whilst the land is there, it's all single level, mostly single level development. So the sprawl is certainly starting to happen, and they've all got to travel in. So it's a drive into town of 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the city, would not be unrealistic at certain times of the day. Which I guess which I know you're laughing.
Yeah, it's going to take that long just to go 3 blocks in her area.
Yeah. I mean, I drove 6 kilometres. It takes you 20 minutes. But, here's the thing. It's relativity, right? It's the relativity. And this is what often city slickers, make mistakes when they go to regional areas because they think that's nothing. But locals might think that's huge. So it's like, if it's acceptable to the locals, then fine. But if it's not, then, that with a lot of other things too, right?
Yeah, I like to get to the office by 8 o'clock because I don't like to give way to anything on the way to work. No. If you go after 8:30, you got to start slowing down around them.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It's all different, isn't it? But I think you nailed it there, Veronica, and that is that you can't bring a mindset from a different location to a new location, because what is valued by the locals is generally what's going to drive capital growth. So if you take that mindset, and we talk about it for Brisbane, so you can't bring a Sydney mindset to Brisbane because the housing styles are different, the commute time, a 50-minute drive in Brisbane is horrendous, but really quite okay in Sydney. So you can't bring that Sydney mindset up to Brisbane, and similarly, you couldn't take a Brisbane mindset to Orange. You'd have to really understand what it is that makes something attractive in Orange to understand if that could have good capital growth over the long term.
Yes, certainly. And I think a big part of that is the lifestyle of livability of the property. I've had plenty of Sydney people come say, I'm willing to be within 20 minutes of town. Like, no, you're not. Well, what do you mean I'm not? I said, well, where do you live at the moment? You might be 20 minutes to work, but you're 5 minutes to the cafes. You're 5 minutes to the kids' schools. You're 5 minutes to a loaf of bread. If you're 20 minutes from town, you are 20 minutes from town for everything. There is nothing out there unless you grow it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the penny drops is like, oh, yeah, he starts.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Everything is 20 minutes. You want a cup of coffee on Sunday morning? It's a 20-minute drive. Yeah. So all those sorts of things start to impact. And when you start to get into the swing of country life, I live 20 minutes from town. Sometimes it's a bit inconvenient, but when you're out here, it's nice, but most of the time, I've got mates who live a block and a half from the CBD, and they can walk to the pub and have dinner and have a few beers and walk home. And it's just like, yeah, that would be good, But horses are horses, and they all do different things. We all do different things.
Lifestyle choices. No, but you went in with your eyes wide open.
Yeah.
You knew that's what the lifestyle was that you wanted,
Yeah,
as opposed to accidentally finding out after you'd bought.
That's it.
Yeah. I know.
And like my kids don't need to go to school for swimming at 5:30 in the morning anymore. So it's okay. We don't have to get up to do those things where we once did when we were living closer to town. So those sorts of things, as the kids get busier, if that's what's going on in your life, people still do it. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's I've certainly known people who have sold the farms and moved to town whilst their kids are young or busy, and then relocated again once that they're not running in and out of town 5 times a day.
Because 20 minutes in the country, also you cover a lot more ground than you cover driving urban. As I said, it takes me 20 minutes to go 6 Ks. Well, how many Ks are you driving in the country for 20 minutes? I mean, you're probably going 25 Ks or something, right?
You can do most of that at 100 or 80 Ks an hour.
Yeah.
Probably not see a lot of houses along that route into the town either.
No.
Until you really hit the outskirts of the town.
Until you hit the little boxes on the hillside in the new subdivisions on the edge of town.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt. Look, this is, we like to have these little chats about what's going on out there and beyond our own little realms. And we do have quite a few first home buyers listening to the podcast that have bought in regional areas. And certainly we've had some case studies on the podcast who bought in Victorian regional areas, also in Dubbo recently, as I mentioned earlier. But what is one thing that you know now? I mean, you're a property professional, we already said that, but what's one thing that you know now that you wish you'd known as a first home buyer?
Good question. As a first home buyer, don't wait so long. Get into it. I hesitated for 2 years and it cost me 50% capital gain.
Oh, gosh.
I was a bit, in those days I was living in Sydney and I was too smart to buy in Orange at the time. This is back in 1999. And the house that I could have bought for 120 grand, it cost me $230,000 2 years later.
Oops.
So,
can I ask, what was holding you back? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember. I knew too much.
Right, smart ass.
Because you thought prices were going to go backwards, or?
I just didn't have, I didn't see value in it. In those days, Sydney was where I was headed and everything was focused that way. I didn't have enough experience. I was straight out of uni. I've been working for 12 months, maybe a little bit less or more rather. And I was so Sydney centric, I couldn't see past the hills like all people would play out about that today. But I just thought Sydney was where it was at because I didn't know enough. It's where I was working. It's all I could see. In very early days, I didn't know how to analyse property and markets properly.
Yeah.
And I was just looking. I used to drive through Dundas Valley. I scoffed at that. I should have bought 5 of them if I was smart. Which that's that little pocket of the world back in the late 90s was not so great. Now anything outside of Parramatta is good enough. So I think it's really if you're hesitant about buying, it's because you don't know enough. So find someone who can fill that gap for you, answer all your questions, and don't be afraid to take that step. And don't be too arrogant or ignorant to take that step. And you've got to be realistic about what you're earning, what you can afford. And whilst the bank may throw $1 million at you, maybe spending all that in one investment with a low yield, is that the best outcome for you? You can't live on capital gain. You can't pay a debt with capital gain. You do need some sort of cash flow. So yeah, you've got to look at the bigger picture, I guess. And yeah, I was certainly guilty of that in the early days.
Well, I guess there's a lot. We could tease all those things out almost and have an entire podcast episode on some of those regrets or those things that you've learned now. I think when it comes to first home buyers, we are always on the case about making a really good first step, buying a very solid first step onto the property ladder. I think we're not huge fans of rent investing, and we're going to have to do an episode on that soon, I think, in terms of why. And recently I've come across...
Oh, let's reframe that. I'm not a fan of rent investing, Veronica. It's just I think some people do it without understanding the long-term implications and the limitations that may place on them, which is why we might do that. We're doing that episode.
Yeah, it's right for some people, but the problem is that a lot of people think that I have to do that, then they rush and they actually rent invest when waiting could be better for them. But it all depends on the reasons that you're waiting, like Matt was saying just then, waiting because you think you know better or you're too smart, too cool for school. We all make mistakes when we think we know more than we do. But the thing with first home buyers is that whatever you buy, it has to help you on your climb up that ladder. And sometimes people buy rent vest and it actually stops them dead because they really could have waited a bit longer and actually been able to buy a home. So there's a lot to consider. And I think that's the sort of thing that Matt's alluding to there, is that there's a lot more to these decisions than you might think. And to sort of funnel yourself down one very narrow pathway of thinking can lead you to miss opportunities when you should be buying or hold back when you shouldn't be buying. And that's what we're here to help guide you through. Anything you want to add there, Megan?
No, I think that's a great point because, and we will really tease this out in coming weeks because it can seem safe to buy something cheaper. If you can't afford to buy where you want to live, right? And you say, I'm going to rent best, and you think, I can buy something much cheaper in an area that I don't want to live in. So I'll just get into the market. That classic get in the market any way you can, which is not advice that we give, but we hear it a lot. Getting on the ladder at any cost at the cheapest price that you can or the cheapest entry point that you can actually limit you from then. It might limit your borrowing capacity from actually being able to buy a house, even if your income comes up. So there's all of these other knock-on effects that people are not necessarily aware of when they say, oh, it's going to be cheaper if I buy over here and just rent it out and then I'll do what I want to do when I've increased my income. You might actually completely stop the ladder. You might have a one-step ladder if you make the wrong decision with the first one. And that's not what we want for you. We want you to have quite a long ladder that gets you to the dream, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Whether that's in Orange or in Piper's Point.
Yeah.
It could also mean, and this is a thing that we've just come across a lot of people that actually contemplating the move themselves. So they live in a regional town. And that's where I think that learning about these sorts of things is really important, because if you're going to make that big move, I love that, 20 minutes out of town from a Sydney sider that says, I'm okay 20 minutes out of town. It's like, you're 25. Get out.
Me. Yeah.
Let's talk Ks now, not minutes. Because it's all different. But I think it's a really legitimate consideration for some first home buyers to actually move outside the cities to get into the market and to start their property owning journey and live there, and as well as potentially invest, but certainly to consider living there.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's more and more people moving out. There's no doubt about it. The larger regional cities are certainly a lot more culturally diverse than what they once were. And whether that's visa requirements, I'm not quite sure why, but certainly there's a good mix of cultures in these towns now. Whereas 20 years ago it probably was not the case. And that brings with it a whole new restaurants, new flavors to all sorts of things, which is great. It changes the culture of the place. So there's certainly different towns to what they were 20 years ago and beyond. So and as they grow, the the old cliques of, they're still all there like they are in every suburb of Sydney, of people who remain local to the area they grew up in and went to school in. But they're big enough and diverse enough where that sort of gets washed out if you put yourself out there and get involved in what's going on.
So it makes it easier to make friends. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yep. It's it can be quite good for people who like it. And I've got Sydney-based family who basically live in the suburb. I mean, they live in the suburb that they grew up in, and that's fine. But it's just they're mostly just living in country towns within the city. Kids go.
I go to my school reunions, and haven't been to one for a while, but I can actually count almost on two hands the amount of people who bought their parents' house.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I find that weird, but anyway.
Close as that.
Yeah. Well, it's like I love my childhood so much. I want my kids to have exactly the same childhood. It's like, oh dear, I've definitely wanted to spread my wings more than that. But, that mentality does occur, and it's good for some people.
Is that an affordability thing?
No, I think that's just a mindset. That's just that they really love it. God's country, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Look, Matt, that's amazing. My key takeaways, I think, are that even just thinking generally, I want to go to somewhere affordable regionally. It's much more in depth. The work that you need to do is much more in depth than just making a decision. Is it a capital city or a country town or a major regional centre? Because getting deep diving in with you about some of these areas and what's unique to them. If you can't afford an expert to help you on that journey, and a local expert like you who knows these places really well, then you have to submerge yourself in them before you make a decision about what to buy and where to live, because they've got such unique characters and unique aspects to them too from a livability point of view. But then from a property assessment point of view, my takeaway from you is it can be one end of the street or the other. And if you get that wrong, then you might have paid the wrong price and be living in an area that you really, really don't like.
Yeah. That's certainly true. And the other thing is, your neighbours can be very varied regardless of where you live.
Don't worry, they can be varied in the city too.
Don't like to be varied in the city. People interesting human.
Oh, we are. All right, a quick note. You might think that we cover everything that you need to know in these podcasts. A word of warning, I should say. We do not. We just scratch the surface here. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order so you don't make a big mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. Our first home buyer guide course only costs $990 and you get access to help from us to guide you through your negotiations. We do this every Wednesday in Campfire. Trust me, you'll overpay a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out your first home buyer guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you've found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.